What I intended to do is to actually sort of fast forward, if you get my meaning, to a time when I was an experienced captain of Halifax's, and I had to take what we called a second dickey. Second dickey means he's a co-pilot, but he has no duties. He's merely an observer. And this particular time, I think I'd completed about 16 operations, ops we used to call them. And this particular time, we almost got clobbered with flak. It was so close, and we counted. What I intended to do is to actually sort of fast forward, if you get my meaning, to a time when I was an experienced captain of Halifax's, and I had to take what we called a second dickey. Second dickey means he's a co-pilot, but he has no duties. He's merely an observer. And this particular time, I think I'd completed about 16 operations, ops we used to call them. And this particular time, we almost got clobbered with flak. It was so close, and we counted the holes eventually. There were 56 holes in the aeroplane, but fortunately, with all that shrapnel flying around, no one was injured, and the aircraft, well, there were minor faults with it, hydraulics and stuff like that, but no engines out, stuff like that. So we had to come back to Manston, which is an emergency airfield on the east coast. And when it was all over, because I had a co-pilot with me, a second dickey, on his first trip, a young sergeant pilot, as I was then. I was now a flight lieutenant. And when it all quietened down, he said to me, "Excuse me, sir, is it always like this?" So I thought about that for a moment and said, no, sometimes it's worse, which it was in my case. Now I get on to my story, if I may interject that. When I reported to RAF Station Breton in Yorkshire as a new pilot, you have to, by Bomber Command instructions, fly with an experienced crew, someone who'd done at least 16 or 20 operations, ops we call them. And this particular time I was introduced to, never seen them before in my life, a Flight Lieutenant Knight and his crew, and the target was in Germany, and it was a great experience. Was it frightening? Well, apprehensive, I suppose, but, you know, I was the new boy, and anyway, we bombed the target, came back, and we're over Holland, though, you know, there's some doubt about that, whether, because the borders are so close, Germany and Holland, and we were clobbered by an ME-110, the pilot of whom, of which actually did survive. I haven't done the research on him, but the Dutch do a lot of research, and he did survive the war with a lot of victories. Because once you somehow got out of the bomber stream, you were an easy target, mainly because they were equipped with 20mm cannon, and you could reply only with 303 bullets. So the range was in their favor. They could, you know, stand off a bit and poop away at you, which is exactly what this chap did. He hit the starboard engines and the fuel tanks, and both the engines were on fire, and eventually the order came to bail out. And so this was very difficult for me because, you know, it was a new experience. We had no training of bailing out, except we had these chest packs, you clip them on. Funnily enough, we used to clip them on as we went into the target. But, you know, once you left the target, you unclipped it and put it in your stowage. But I certainly found that stowage quickly, clipped it on, and made sure the captain, the pilot, Flight Lieutenant Knight, had his clipped on as well. And the escape hatch in the forward part of the aircraft was open. And now the time has come to bail out. But I couldn't get out initially because, you know, by this time the wing had burnt off and detached itself. So the aircraft was spiraling earthwards. From about 18,000 feet, we got down very quickly to when I bailed out, when it was about 1,500 feet. Because I simply couldn't get out. I sat on the escape hatch because the forces, the centrifugal force, was holding me back in our aircraft. And eventually I said, overcome that, because I was actually only 19 years old, and some of these things that you read about are absolutely true, where your whole life goes before you in a flash. It really is true. But then a little calmness comes over you, because now, and in my case, within 20 seconds, the aircraft was going to hit the ground, and I would find out what it was like on the other side. So I found that rather interesting in a macabre sort of way. But eventually I overcame and got out of the aircraft, I suppose, about 500 meters, 1,500 feet, something like that, and very quickly hit the ground. So now you're in a totally different environment. You only had briefings from the intelligence officer about this environment, but no personal experience, obviously. So now what to do? First of all, you bury the parachute. Fortunately, I wasn't injured in any way, no sprained ankles or anything like that. You bury the parachute, you effect some sort of disguise. We used to have sweaters, which I put over my flying jacket, and or battle dress jacket, and made my way to the edge of the field. And now, of course, I knew from briefings with the intelligence officer that the Germans actually would search diligently for about 5 kilometers around the aircraft crash. I could see the aircraft crash about 3 miles away. And at that time, I didn't quite know who was in it and who was not in it. I'll tell you that later. I only found out that when I got back to the UK. Now I have to sort of make as much distance as I can from the aircraft. So I chose a southwesterly course by the stars. It's a bright moonlight night. Incidentally, I forgot to mention that we had been coned, I don't know whether you know what coned is, by searchlights. So we were an easy target. Everything came up at us. And of course we're now lit up for the night fighter. So now I'm wandering around sort of for about 5 days on my own in a strange country, in a strange environment, knowing that, I had survived, but what to do now, you see. So the rule was you never walked during the day. You always walked at night. And you avoided major roads, obviously. So I used to sort of walk during the night and sleep during the day, anywhere where I could hide myself. And one particular occasion I remember, because, when you're wandering around in a strange, mostly farming area, you get farm dogs barking away and that sort of thing. So I must have created a bit of mayhem. And eventually there was a German patrol. Whether they were looking for me, perhaps too much coincidence, but I think they were, because I had been reported somewhere, I suppose. And I just lay in the hedge with the grass over me. No, lay in a ditch, actually, by the side of the road. And this patrol arrived, and they all got out, there were about 6 of them, and they were searching, and 1 or 2 were firing rifles, perhaps at what, I don't know. And just then, it's funny how the things you remember, but just then a little field mouse came on my chest. And, I thought, well, I better not sneeze or cough or anything like this. This is a dead giveaway, you see. So it just sort of took a look at me and then scuttled off, you see. And I was very grateful for that. Anyway, they eventually left after about 4 hours. But you see, now I have to make contact with the underground, the resistance. So after about 5 days, your morale actually goes overboard, because you start thinking about, it's easy to give myself up, I'll be a POW. But then you have to fight this a bit, because you are actually in a position where a lot of POWs would love to be. You're on the outside. So I overcame that, and eventually, after about the 5th day, I heard some school children going along the road in daylight, going to school, a little village called Berlicum in Holland. So I simply followed them into the school. or into Berlicum. And now I have to make contact. So I had a cafe, which this should be about 9 o'clock in the morning, so it wasn't a very busy time. I had a cafe and, make sure who went in, who came out. I think the Americans call it casing the joint type thing. And, I decided to go in there, you see. Now, we were issued with escape boxes in which there was a phrase card in Dutch and German and French. So I went in, and from the phrase card, I said, "Ik ben Engels pilot." I am English pilot. And the lady behind the counter was, surprised, overawed, and a little bit afraid. But then I said afterwards, from the phrase card, "I'm thirsty and hungry," which I was. And she gave me a sandwich and some water to drink. And I thought, well, having done that, she must be a friend. So I said, "Can you bring someone who speaks English?" Because, phrase cards are rather limited. So she brought the village schoolmaster, Martin de Kinderen. Now, he was the first of my helpers through a long line of dedicated, courageous, I wouldn't say ordinary people, because in many ways they were extraordinary people. But they were basically school teachers, mothers, teenagers, things like that. And they lay their lives on the line for us. So I can't overemphasize that point. Anyway, Martin de Kinderen said to me, "Good morning, how are you?" So I thought, good heavens, he speaks very good English. And he's been an old friend of mine for many years. I sometimes refer to him as my Dutch brother. I've seen him many, many times. He's dead now, unfortunately. But he became the village headmaster of the school there. And he said, "Well, first of all, we have to identify you, see." So I said, "Well, that's fine, because that's being rather cautious." And he said, "Have you got your identity discs?" I think dog tags, the Americans call them. You probably know them. And I said, "Well, no, I've just come off leave," which I had, and unfortunately I left them at home. So he said, "Well, how do I know you're say, who you are?" I said, "Well, aren't you in radio contact with London? Or I'll give you my name, rank and number, that's all I'm going to give." So he said, "Okay." Now I showed him the remnants of my escape box as evidence. And I said, these Horlicks tablets and Halazone tablets and a bottle for water and that sort of thing, a rubber bottle. And he said, "Well, we'll put you in the safe house and then check up on you." Now, I had to be interrogated then by the local resistant group. And this was rather trying for me, because that was done at pistol point. And when you're looking at the wrong end of a pistol, you don't give wrong answers. But they asked me several questions which I couldn't answer. What was the latest show in London? Well, I was based up in Yorkshire. I wouldn't know what so I said, "I don't know," And certain questions like that. And eventually they said, "Well, we'll take a vote on it, on whether we'll go out and shoot you," which they did, because a lot of these escape lines had been infiltrated by bogus pilots. So they were perhaps trigger happy, but they didn't mess about. If they thought you were a plant, they would dispose of you. So eventually a vote was taken by 6, and I survived by 1 vote, which was Martin de Kinderen's, because he had faith in me. So I'm more than grateful to him for that. So I spent a long time in Holland, because they had been decimated by bogus pilots, and their escape organisation wasn't, may I say this, as good as perhaps from Brussels onwards. But they put me in safe houses, and I worked on a farm and stuff like that. And eventually I spent about 10 weeks in Holland. Anyway, after that, of course, you have to be passed down to Brussels. And getting across the border from Holland to... I did stay actually in a little place in the wood just by Tilburg, where there were some Dutch students and some Jewish people who obviously didn't want to be taken off to Germany. And it was quite a happy gathering. I was there for about a week. And, I learned a little bit of Dutch then. I could speak, the learning curve has gone off now, of course. I could converse quite easily in Dutch. Though, you have to be very careful because Dutch is very much like German in a way. You might say something and people might think you're German, you see.
So you were gradually being passed down a succession
Exactly
of
so, yes.
helpers.
Yes. And this particular chap came, he was, I suppose, a policeman. He was, Carl Smit, his name was. He's dead now, by the way, but I saw him also a few times after the war. And he had a motorbike, being a policeman, he was allowed a motorbike. And I sat on this one, and we simply got to the border area, and he put his motorbike in the undergrowth and waited for the German patrol to go past. And he said, right, now we go across. So we went across, and he said, now you're in Belgium. I was amazed, it was so simple. But it didn't end there, because now we had to get to Brussels, and on a train tram. I don't know whether you know this, but in that part of Holland, they had trams that ran on the road, train trams, steam-driven probably mostly. And it was a beautiful day, summer's day. I can't remember exactly the date, but it was a beautiful day, and we sort of took our seats. No papers, by the way. We had no false papers, which is, we're going from one country to another, no money, no papers. We're going to pick those up in Brussels, you see.
And had you been met on, once you got it across the border into Belgium, were you then met, the policeman presumably left you and you met somebody else? Or?
Yes, eventually, yes. It's rather difficult to remember exactly the sequence of events, but someone must have met me. But whilst I was with the policeman, this is rather interesting, I think, anyway, and exciting. Whilst I was with the policeman, we were in a little village en route to Brussels or area, or Antwerp area, and a lot of villagers got on board, and some of whom were ladies, women, so we gave up our seats rather nicely, and we stood in the open way, no doors, on the end of the tram sort of thing. And that helped us considerably, because I noticed then at the next stop, a German patrol got on board. They were checking everyone's papers. We had no papers, and so I was, a bit upset about this. And I couldn't talk to our policeman friend in English, obviously, or even in Dutch. But we decided that we'd have to jump off. So we jumped off this tram. It was doing about 25 miles an hour, something like that, and we just landed in a heap. And we expected, rifle shots and stuff like that, but no one noticed us. There was a commotion on the tram, instigated, I think, by women with wrong papers or something like that. And so we got away with it. And we brushed ourselves down, and we went to the nearest cafe. And this is a part that possibly you won't believe. We celebrated with a glass of lemonade. Ice cold lemonade. Beautiful. Anyway, we finally get to Brussels, and I met in Brussels by the sister of Nadine, a young lady. She was young then, she was about 19 or 20. She's still alive, by the way.
Michu, is it?
Michu, yes. And she took me to a safe house. And I remember that safe house very well, because it was the house of an artist, René Pirat, and his wife Fifine, because René used to do all the false papers for the escape route. not the photographs, but the false papers that you necessary to have. And he used to do these. I used to watch him do it. He'd have a potato, cut it out like in reverse, and get the stamp and stamp it, and it was beautiful. So now we had false papers, and can I say that in Brussels was the beginning of the Comet Line, which arguably was the most successful escape route. I think the figures are something like they took home roughly about 800 aircrew of various denominations. And it was also in Brussels where I met a Canadian air gunner. So from there on, we were together. Brussels to Paris. I can't remember too much about that, but I think there were no big adventures. Oh no, we went to Lille, first of all, in northern France, and at the home of a customs officer, Bricot, Maurice Bricot. I've since seen him many times. He's dead now, of course. And he sort of said, tomorrow we go over the border into France, and you'll have a meal cooked by my wife, Fifine. No, not Fifine. Whatever her name was, Mrs. Bricot.
Madame Bricot.
Yeah, Madame.
So you met him on the Belgian side, and then he took you into France.
Yes, via Lille. And then we are down into Paris, where we stayed. This is Edward and I. He was Canadian. He was an air gunner, I think. We stayed there in a flat which was quite comfortable. It wasn't a sort of spacious flat, but it was quite comfortable. Within sight of the Eiffel Tower. And in that flat, there was an American pilot. I can't remember his name, Hank, I think we called him. And the two of us. And the owner of that, Robert and Georgina, I think her name was, Robert, he...
is that Ellie or Ely? Is that Robert? Is that the same Robert that Bob Frost would have talked about?
Probably, yes. I think so.
I think he said that his wife was Germaine.
Germaine.
Maybe it's a different Robert, but I know Bob talked about an apartment that was used quite a lot by Comet Line evaders.
But forgive me if I don't remember the name, it's rather difficult after so many years to remember. But actually, it wasn't too bad in Paris because a lot of the food was provided by the black market. Money was no problem. And we were looked after rather well. But we'd never really go out. And coming back to Holland, this was a bit of a problem because you had to keep yourself fit because you knew at the end of it you had to climb over the Pyrenees. So I used to do lots of indoor exercises and things like that, keep myself fairly supple. And eventually, of course, arguably this the next part of the route, someone called Rosine. She took me from Paris to Bordeaux. That arguably was the marvellous trip. It was an overnight train. It still runs, by the way. And you sit in the train. We don't talk to anyone. You get behind a German-controlled newspaper, signal line, whatever they called it, and you pretend to sleep. Well, we dozed a bit, I suppose. But there's a bit of a danger there because if you suddenly wake up and someone says, "Oh, good morning," or something like that, you might say, "Oh, good morning. I slept well," or something like that. But funny enough, some elderly chap did say, "Bien dormi." You slept well. So I said, "Oui, monsieur, merci." So I remember my French. Then you get to Bordeaux, and you have to. There are lots of sort of border controls, rather like in the UK, with police checking papers and things like that. But you get used to this. You have faith in your false documents. They're good false documents, if you see what I mean. And you behave accordingly. You do without suspicion, sort of thing. So it's a bit of an ordeal the first or second time you do it, but after a time you do get used to that. And we went from Bordeaux down to a little place called Dax, you're probably same way as other people have done that. And at Dax they had a little cache of bicycles. Now you, assuming you could ride a bicycle, there was one case where an American couldn't ride a bicycle. So he was given a quick go round the the railway yard on how to ride a bicycle. You can guess what happened. He went out on the road immediately, because they drive on the right there, so that's okay. And being American, he was on the correct side of the road, but unfortunately he wobbled a bit and hit a German patrol on bicycles, and everything was scattered. And the Feldwebel, that's a sergeant of the Germans, he sort of picked himself up, and Franco, who was then the nominal head of the Comet Line, because Day had been taken in January, you'll know that from Stanhope, and he produced an empty cognac bottle and said, "Oh, he's un peu zigzag drunk." So everything was dismissed, rather fortunately. And then we had to cycle on to Saint-Jean-de-Luz. And, it was a beautiful evening. And, I was actually enjoying it. And there was Franco in the front, Baron Nockham, Franco was his code name. He was in the front with two evaders behind him, and Edwin and I in the rear. And they went through this village, and we were about to go through the village when we were stopped by a gendarme with his pistol out. They have pistols. And he said, "Halt, what are you doing here?" Well, we had false papers to say we could go into that area. And I said, I don't know why I spoke, because probably Edward's French was better than mine. But I spoke. I said, "Look, we're on a cycling holiday. Here's some bicycles. We're from Paris." And he said, "No, I don't think you're French." And then he said something rather disarming and a bit insulting to us in a way. He said, "I think you're German deserters." So I said, because you didn't quite know the politics of this man, Vichy France and all that. So I said, "All right, okay, yes, we're German deserters. We're fed up with Mr. Hitler and the war. We're going over there to give ourselves up to Spain." And with that, he got his pistol and said, "You must come with me." So then I said to Edward in rapid English, "Let's tell him the truth." So I did. I told him, I said we're two pilots. Actually, he was an air gunner, but that by the by. I said, "We're two pilots, so we're going over the Pyrenees, and we're going back to the UK to fight for freedom." And he was near enough to me, I just tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Vive la France." And with that, he had a smile on his face. He put his pistol away and said, "But you must come with me." So I thought, well, it's the lasting one, because Franco had disappeared with the other two evaders, and we could actually see the Pyrenees. It was a beautiful sight. So I said, "Well, no, sure, thank you very much, rather not." But he said, "No, I insist." So he took us back to the police station, showed all his chums, "Look what I've got, it's a couple of English pilots here. They're going down over Spain and going to, fight for freedom and all." And of course we had a van d'honneur, normal. And but after about half an hour, I said, "Look, you see, I'm afraid we have to go now." So we did. We left there, and how to wait for Franco, the guide, you see, because he would know the safe houses. So we just stood in the hedge, Edward and I said, "Look, that chap, Franco's intelligent man. He'll come back looking for us." He got rid of the other evaders, not got rid of them, he put them in the safe house, and came back cycling. And I said, "We're over here in the hedge." And he said, "Oh, thank God for that." He said, "I thought you two had been picked up." So I said, well, it was rather, I didn't tell him the story then, but I told him later on. And he said, okay, so we went into a safe house. And now, of course, we're in the safe house, and we finally get to Saint-Jean-de-Luz, where we stayed in the house of Catalina Aguirre. Catalina, Helen knows Catalina, or at least her children. Catalina's dead now, but she died when she was 93 I've got her obituary. Marvellous woman. She was, almost like a mother figure to us young airmen. She insisted that we have a good meal because that night we're going to cross the Pyrenees. We were introduced to Florentino, the mountain guide, and off we went. It took us 14 hours to get across the Pyrenees because the Bidassoa, which is the river that separates the borders there between France and Spain, was in full torrent. There had been a lot of rainfall. So we couldn't cross there. We had to cross at a little footbridge, which was a detour. And it did put another couple of hours on it, sort of thing. But on this footbridge, you had to go one at a time because otherwise the bridge swings and makes a noise. And there's a little hut at the end where the guards, fortunately, were asleep. And so you sort of crept across one at a time. And now you're in Spain. But now, you see, that's not the end of it because you've got to sort of get through the whole of Spain and eventually to Gibraltar. And that can be rather hazardous because some people are picked up and put in a jail called Miranda up in the Pyrenees. And there you could languish for months before the consul or the ambassador would make demands and release you. But we got to San Sebastian, reported to the consul there, and then we were taken by car to Madrid. Now, again, another adventure there because they didn't have any motorways in those days, of course. And the journey was rather tiresome. The driver, Spanish driver, insisted on sleeping at the wheel. And so we sang all the songs we could think of to keep him awake. And they were, we knew quite a few ribald songs. And eventually we were missing cars in the road and not taking corners. And, oh, God, it was heartbreaking. We finally got to Madrid. And now you have to get from Madrid to Gibraltar. Now, a lot of the people went by cars, diplomatic cars, in the boots of cars to La Linea, which is just north of Gibraltar, and or smuggled across the border. Once you're in Gibraltar, you're on British territory, of course. But if you're within an embassy car, that is also part of Britain, you see. So, but for us, it was slightly different. And I think you may have heard this before from other people, but for us, we had to go via Sevilla to, stop the Germans knowing how many people, I suppose, were getting through the border. And there we had to sort of, you get on a coaster. This was about a 2,000-ton coaster. You had to pretend you were drunken sailors. So to do that, some of the crew of the boat came ashore, and we went into a bar, and we all got rather like drunken sailors, you see. And as we went up the gangplank, because they had a Guardia Civil at the gangplank, as you go up there, you have to pass the guard and he would look at your paper normally. But we hugged him and kissed him and shook hands and said, oh biento, or whatever they say in Spanish. Totzins is Dutch. And he just let us through. So then you have to go right down into the hold, and we did. And because the ship is actually thoroughly searched by the Spanish, because Spain is neutral, the ship is thoroughly searched by the Spanish authorities before it's released. And then, so for that 2 days we were in the hold. It was a bit tiresome, but you couldn't exercise. But we had plenty of food. The crew looked after us rather well, and we weren't disturbed. And eventually you come out of there and you go down through Cadiz and you turn left and then you see Gibraltar. Now that's when I had this first whiff of freedom. I thought, you've made it. Perhaps a little bit from my own efforts, but mainly from the efforts of all these wonderful people in the resistance from Holland, Belgium, France.
So technically, although by the time you got to Spain, you were sort of okay, but you didn't get that sense of proper freedom until Gibraltar was in sight.
Now that was when you got your first whiff of, you've made it, freedom. And, that rock looked rather beautiful. But then, of course, you then have to report to the authorities in Gibraltar, and they're very kindly sympathetic. They sort of that night we flew back to Lynham. I don't think it was that night, but they gave us a bit of back pay, which was rather nice because we all went out and bought bananas and nylon stockings and stuff like that for our girlfriends and bananas for the family. And eventually it took about 8.5 hours in a Dakota because you can appreciate you couldn't fly over Spain because Spain is neutral. You had to fly out to the Atlantic and then go north.
Quite a dogleg journey.
Yes, but eventually you land at Lynham, and now you know you're home.
I was actually, normally what I do, I do ask people to talk a little bit about their family life and the lead up to the war, and obviously in your case, the war had been going on. When did you actually join?
I joined in February 41, when I was actually my true age. I was 16 3/4, because that was the minimum age you could be enlisted for aircrew, and then you were called up at 18 1/4. In my case, 17 1/4.
I mean, and where were you? And up to that point, you were living with your family, presumably.
Yes.
And whereabouts was that?
In London, where we had been subjected to rather severe bombing and that sort of thing, and I think this was part of my, I'll pay you back type of thing.
So which part of London were you living?
Round the Docklands area, because my father was a sailor between the wars. And it's rather interesting this, because when I finally got back to Uxbridge as a holding unit, I thought, well, I can get on an underground train and get to where I lived and go and present myself, you see. And it'd be about 10:30 at night. So, because my parents, incidentally, my mother thought I'd had it dead. But my father said, well, they haven't, produced a body yet, so, there's always hope type of thing. So when I got back to the house, I sort of knocked on the door and just sang a little song. It's only me from over the sea, says Barnacle Bill the Sailor, which is one of my dad's favourite songs, he being a merchant sailor before the war, in between the wars. He was in the Great War, of course. And they said, oh, it's George. And he opened the door. He'd obviously gone to bed. He pulled up trousers and his braces and things like that. And he kissed me. Well, that was rather nice, because he must have kissed me as a young boy, a little child. But I thought it was very good. And then everything, the neighbours came in and there was celebration all around. I think we all got to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning.
So what news had they had of you since your...
Nothing, just that your son is missing. That's all. They hadn't received the telegram that your son has successfully made it to Gibraltar. That came, funnily enough, the next day. So I think it was probably wrong of me, quite honestly, to have put upon them that night. But I was so overjoyed at making it, as I said earlier on, partially my own efforts, but mainly because of the resistance, the underground and escape routes. I was so, rather proud of myself in a way.
Well, and you automatically wanted to reassure them as
exactly,
well.
Yes. As quickly as possible.
Yes. So I mean, before you'd gone into the RAF, I mean, as you say, you'd been on literally the receiving end of what the German Air Force could do.
Oh yes. So I think you possibly have read my story, but I thought, well, our Bomber Command Chief, Arthur Harris, he said something like, they've sown the seed or something, and now they've reaped the whirlwind. Bomber Command losses, I didn't quite know what to dwell on this a bit, but they were astronomical in 43, 44. They eased off a bit in 45. But the losses, per capita of the total force of about 85,000, 55,500 got the chop. Oh, got the chop. We're dead.
Yeah. That's a horrendously high proportion, isn't it?
Yes. But it's funny enough, you accepted that, and you overcame it. It's really interesting.
And on your own aircraft, I mean, when you bailed out, did you know anything at all about what was happening with the other crew members?
No. I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I got back and I was debriefed, etc., I said, what happened to the other crew members? 5 were killed and 2 were POWs. So that's, well, I was actually serving in India at the time, and I wrote my account in India. And but flying has been all my life, because after the war I joined British Airways. But I was on something called, I don't know whether it's very interesting. You should get people talking about the Berlin airlift. I don't want to be boastful, but factual. 236 flights into Berlin. And, this was a bit odd, because the Dutch people could never understand this. Because when I was interviewed on Dutch television about my evasion, etc., I said, well, the aircraft in my time had been a form of destruction, and now it was helping people, the Germans. And they couldn't understand that, because they suffered terribly. Did you ever hear of Operation Manna? Manna from Heaven? No. What it was, Lancasters were briefed, because Holland was not immediately occupied, not the whole of Holland. The northern part, they had a very severe winter in 1944, and they had a sort of hunger winter, famine, because the Germans just took everything, you see. And they were actually eating tulip bulbs and stuff like that. So the plan was that they would use Lancasters in this case, not Halifaxes, Lancasters, to go over and drop food. And they made an arrangement with the German commander that they would not be shot at. So there were these chaps dropping food from 500-600 feet. Manna from Heaven. Operation Manna, I think it was called. I wasn't on that.
After you got back and you'd obviously been reunited with your family, etc., and got sort of gone back into active duty, I mean, you were asked, can you just tell us what you did after that?
Well, you are debriefed, obviously, and they sort of say, well, what would you like to do now? So I said, well, what have you in mind? What are the alternatives? And they said at that time, well, a company called BOAC are looking for young pilots, rather like you. I said, well, what do they do, in my innocence? They said, oh, they're civil. I said, I don't want to do that. All I want to do is get back to the squadron to help repay for all the, And could I just mention here that a lot of people who did this went back on ops, as we called them, and they got the job then. So, a very large proportion of them.
Yeah, I was under a misapprehension, because I thought that if you'd evaded successfully, that
it changed in 1942, I think it was. What they would try and do was send you to a different theatre of operations. But then it all changed, because we had people going back who, evaded or escaped even from occupied Europe.
Because I thought there was a worry if you were shot down again, then you obviously.
Well, there was always that, and I think you possibly had a word with Stanhope, because he was very badly treated, so much so I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe that he did give some information away. I'm not sure. To his regret, he's probably.
Well, I think he had on him. He told me. Yeah. He had on him and the name of somebody, and that person ended up being arrested and killed.
Well, we were expressly forbidden to not make a name or a written name in anything. So this is why my memory is a bit hazy about names, because you simply couldn't, just in case you were picked up.
No, he was quite open about that. He said that he had a piece of paper in his pocket, and it was the name of this chap, and it was the son of the family that he was with, I think, for, if I remember correctly, about a month in Brussels. Yeah. And he socialised with this chap, and they went to parties, they had Christmas together, he went to a football match with this guy.
Oh, that's right,
and
yes.
Then he had this name on him, and when he went back after the war, I think the mother was still alive, but the son had been taken away. hadn't survived, his captivity. So I think Stan's quite burdened with that thought, actually.
Well, yes, he would be, but I'm not passing judgment on Stan, of course, but you were expressly forbidden to make a note of names. In fact, I knew a chap who was constructing an airport in Holland, fighters, and I used to sort of draw out the plans of this airport and then immediately scrap it every day. So I could, just write very quickly. When I got back to Air Ministry for my debrief, I said to the chap, he said, you found out any information? I said, well, I did find out about a fighter airfield in Holland. And he said, oh, which one was that? Gills Orion or somewhere. So he said, well, can you draw it for me? So I could draw this thing in my sleep, practically. So I did this for him. And I said, the bomb dump is there and the fuel dump is there. He said, oh, I'm glad. He went to a big cabinet, pulled out the thing, and there was the exact runway layout, but they hadn't got the fuel dump. He said, we wondered where the fuel dump was, but now you supplied it. And they sent over an aircraft and demolished it. So I did some good.
So you were gathering intelligence as
yes.
well. Yeah,
oh, yes, yes. Well, the feedback from bomb damage was rather limited. My wish was to get back to 78 Squadron. Mainly to say, oh, I'm back, chaps, type of thing, and carry on to finish my tour, which I did eventually, by the way. But that was just a little bit after D-Day. But they said, well, would you do something for us? So I said, what is that? They said, well, look, would you do a lecture tour? So I covered 22 stations, Bomber Command stations, giving lectures on evasion and escape and stuff like that. But with the help of intelligence officers, I built in their brief as well. And, I think they worked on a little principle that if young Duffee can get away with it, anyone can. So, but that's very interesting. That took the time. And then, of course, I had to get another crew because my own crew, it took me 4 months to get back. My own crew, by this time, had been taken over by the flight commander and were well into their tour. So they didn't want a Sprock pilot like me, as I was then, to be in command of them. So I couldn't get, I had to get another crew, go right back through the whole system again, go up to Lossiemouth to fly the Wellington with a new crew. I'll show you some photographs of the crew. I've got both my crews, the first lot and the second lot. One little point though about the first lot of crew, when I went on this operation it was a place in Germany. Do I have to mention the place?
Yeah.
It was Mulheim, actually, Mulheim. And it was heavily defended. And as I say, I was apprehensive. But the bomb aimer, my original crew, said, oh, if you don't come back, could I have your pajamas? Because these were rather special pajamas I bought in America, silk pajamas. And the navigator said to me, and if you don't come back, could I have your briefcase? I bought a rather nice briefcase. So I said, yes, of course. So when I did get back, I didn't ask for them back. But
so you had to go back to basics and really work your way up through the system again.
Exactly so. Yes. So that took time. I mean, I got back in about October 43, and I didn't get back on ops again until just after D-Day 44.
And then you were a skipper. I mean,
Yes. Oh, incidentally, it's rather interesting that because when I got back to the squadron, they said, well, being a new skipper, captain, you'll have to fly with an experienced crew. So I said, no, sir. I said, oh. I said, well, I've had a word with my crew, my second crew, and they say they're quite happy to come with me on my first trip, so we did. So I avoided going again. I didn't want to repeat.
And you were on bombing missions again?
Yes, I did 39 bombing missions, and they very kindly gave me a DFC.
Well, considering you've been shot down so early on, that was a pretty gutsy thing to do, to go back and, I mean, presumably, you could have done something different, not non-operational if you know, if you'd chosen to.
Well, yeah, you might be an equipment officer or something like that, but no, there's no. You want to get back into it and show your, you know, your appreciation of all the efforts. You know, complete strangers.
Well, I suppose that was why these complete strangers wanted to get you
Yes.
back, because they wanted you to
Well, exactly.
to fly again.
So if you went back and you didn't resume operations, it was, you know, in a way, a waste of their time. So as I said earlier on, my request was always to get back to 78 Squadron, which I did eventually. And as I say, I finished my trips, 39 ops total.